Hi there, welcome to my studio. I'm Linda Banfalvi and I'm a mixed media artist. I paint with oil and cold wax medium and I paint with acrylics. Sometimes I start with acrylics and then move on to the oils, or sometimes just work with the oils and cold wax. Today in my studio I am going to be painting floral. The theme is purple pansies, and I just really felt like doing that when I paint a lot of landscapes. I sort of spice it up in between with florals because I find they're a really nice loose way to paint, and I can play with different colors that maybe I wouldn't necessarily use in a landscape. On YouTube, I have several recent landscape paintings. If you're interested in having a look, I'm going to be regularly posting new demonstrations. I painted a layer of transparent yellow, and it is actually Indian yellow, and it's a lovely warm color, and I like to do a base layer very thinly before I continue on painting my image. Then you can see that I'm working with a darker value orange. This is transparent orange, and I'm just feeling out where I want to place my shapes, creating some marks, and just getting the feel for the composition. And it's an intuitive way. I have some photographs that I had taken of pansies just to inspire some of the shapes. And as I'm painting, I'm just trying to be very loose, and I'll have a main flower and then some secondary characters, I call them, smaller flowers that are less important. And so I'm just feeling out where I want to place them and just spending some time doing that. Getting some darks ready there that I'm going to use my rubber roller. It's a brayer that's used for printmaking. That's lots of fun to be able to add some paint to the surface quickly and easily. I'm using a transparent brown type of color, and it's over top of those yellows and oranges. It's creating a very lively, transparent dark passages. I know that my flowers are purples and whites and cool colors, and same with the foliage. So I'm interested in setting up some energy and texture in the underpainting layers that's warm, and then as I proceed, I will start to add cool colors. Here I'm adding some cool. It's some purples, and there's a little bit of white mixed in with the purple. And purple and yellow are complementary colors. When you put them beside each other, they vibrate, and when you mix them together, they neutralize each other. So I'm going to be getting a combination of that, working wet into wet, and some interesting, unique ways to mix the paint as I go along. I'm developing the main pansy shape here with the initial layers. This is so much fun. At the beginning of the painting, you're just feeling it out and adding layers, and it's very forgiving because you can do things and just see what you like and how the paint's mixing. And then if you don't like what you've done, you can end up scraping some off or painting over top of it as well. I'm spending some time adding another dark value that's the dioxazine purple, and it's mixing with some of the white that I already have on the paper and some of the same purple that I've added white into it. So I'm playing with the different values of the same color. And the dioxazine violet or purple is very transparent when you haven't mixed any white into it. As soon as you add white, it makes it opaque. And so it sits on the transparent layers below it a little differently than when you haven't mixed the white in it. So it's really fun. I enjoy painting that way, alternating with transparencies and opaque paint. And I'm using my trusty Messermeister bowl scraper as a palette knife. And you can do this with palette knives. I do this a lot because it gives a very nice soft feel when you're adding the paint, and it subtracts and scrapes away the paint nice and smoothly as well. So I actually prefer it to palette knives, but I do use palette knives as well, depending on the day. You will see me use some other little smaller tools. This is a fairly large tool. I'm using parts like the point of it and sometimes the flat edge, depending on what I'm doing. It's using a big tool on a small surface. Really, you can't get really precious, and you can't go to the detail you have to paint the big shapes to start. And I usually try to paint the big shapes, and then as I proceed, I start to fine tune the smaller shapes. I'm still in this stage where I've blocked in where my flower shape is, or most of it, and now I'm working on some of the negative space with some green, some cool green colors, and then some lighter valued green gold mixed with white to add some vibration with the purples. So there's a combination of warm and cool yellows, and then the purples and the greens. That I like those color combinations. Now I did just show my bottle of Gamsol. It's an odorless paint thinner, and sometimes when I really want to go to chaos and do some paint blending, and you can really get out of hand really quickly doing this, but I added a little spritz, very delicate spritz of the Gamsol with that spray bottle onto the surface of the painting. And then I let it sit for maybe 20 seconds or 30 seconds max. And then I'm scraping and blending the paint right now, and dragging it a little bit over top of the flower shapes. Like I said, that beginning stage was just to place where my flower was going to be. I wasn't painting the final flower by any means yet. And here I'm scraping back to some of the undercolors, trying to create the illusion of leaves surrounding the pansy flowers, and it creates a sense of depth when you have the underlayer come through as well as building surface layers. Sometimes when I do this part, I go, oh my goodness, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But I just keep on going and building my layers, and it's a way to get a unique paint mixing, and I wouldn't get the finished product in the end if I hadn't have gone through some of these chaos stages. It's easy to get to chaos very quickly especially when you're painting on a small painting. This is just a little 11 by 15 quarter sheet of oil paper. And oil paper is a cotton rag, just a good quality watercolor paper, acid free, made with cotton rag, but it's been treated in the factory with something to make the paper stand up to having oil paint worked on top. That's why it's called oil paper. And I love working on paper surfaces. I like the feel of it, but I also like the fact that it's very thin and portable. So when I was traveling, this painting was done while I was traveling. I was in a friend's studio while I videotaped this. And I painted, I think, around 22 or 24 paintings over the time that I was traveling. And it was easy. Once it was touch dry, I can just pack it in my case. I let it dry for about a week. I have this special container that I use for drying wet paintings. And then after a couple days, I'm able to pack it into my box that I have the finished paintings in. So it's convenient for traveling. So as I've been talking, I added more colors. I added some cobalt teal over the layers with the whole idea to add some pure intense colors back into the area that I had previously scraped. And now I'm adding some intense green gold that's been mixed with white. So it's another zingy color that I like the way it looks with the teal and with the purples. So I play back and forth from light to dark, from intense colors to neutralized colors. And it's just intuitive. What does the painting need next? When I do one process, I work the whole painting at once. When I introduce a color, I'm going to work the whole painting with that color where I want to place it. And then I may paint over top again. Working with oils and cold wax, it's a very easy way for layering and getting beautiful textures. When you look at the finished piece up close at the end, you'll see there's so many textures going on there, and I just love that. Color and texture are two elements of design that I just love using in my paintings. And for me, I'm basically thinking in terms of abstract shapes and big shapes, medium shapes, and then little shapes towards the end. And I'm thinking of balancing my colors, my shapes, my values, connecting the edges of my painting to create a flow, a light value pattern, so my eye will flow through from one part of the painting to another. And same with the dark values and the middle values. I'm constantly intuitively checking things for balance and what's catching my eye too much away from my focal point. Like my flower is going to be my focal point. And so I want the most areas of contrast and interest there to keep me engaged in that area, but it needs to be balanced throughout the composition at the same time. And I'm playing with a smaller scraper tool. It's a little silicone scraper again, I can't remember what it's called, but it's got a nice little angle to it, and I can make smaller shapes into there's a secondary flower shape that's tucked in behind the main pansy shape. So I'm just playing with that and just moving the paint. I don't have paint on the painting tool. I'm really just moving paint around that's already on the paper. Sometimes I pick up paint and move it to another part of the painting as well. And what I really like about pansies is those beautiful, vibrant colors. I love the ones that are purple with the white. There's white petals behind, and then there's purple in the front. And they blow in the breeze, so they look like their hair is just being blown in the wind. I find that they have characters of their own, and I'm just painting quite loose and abstractly. Right now I'm balancing a lighter value of purple throughout the composition. There's little flowers that are peeking out through the behind some of the foliage, and I'm just overlapping some of the teal where it's too bright, things like that, or some of the greens. And if I'm just painting a pure abstract where there's no representational subject, I would paint in a very similar way, just balancing my shapes, colors, and values, and trying to create some balance and flow through the composition. And with a variety of shapes, with repetition, with variation. You don't want all the shapes to be the same size. Checking your edges so that there's some hard edges where you want your eye to look, and there's soft edges so you can flow through a shape to the next shape. You don't want it all to be hard outlined like a cutout. And sometimes I'll restate shapes, and then I'll soften edges within that shape. It's a continual process, and I try something on for size and decide, yeah, I like that, or no, I'm just going to knock that down a bit and then do something else. So I'm constantly making those decisions as to what the painting needs. It's not that I'm painting a happy flower, a pretty little flower. I'm painting how that flower makes me feel with the sunny day, with the breeze blowing the petals around, and they're just grabbing my attention. And so that's what I'm trying to capture. And sometimes most of the time I do have a particular subject matter, whether it's a floral or a landscape. Every now and then I'll just paint colors and shapes for the sake of painting them and playing with colors and mark making. So you got to try it all, right? So I'm playing there. I just scraped out a little bit of this part of that flower. There we go. I scraped it out a little back down to the oranges and the yellows, and then I added a little hit of that green gold just to make your eye vibrate with the purples in that area. That's where the focal point is, that big flower shape. And now I'm changing some of the shapes along the edges to make it more pansy-like. And this is the part where I slow down and I consider trying to make those shapes in some areas so that they read like that's what it is. It's a flower. And I'll scrape back and make line work as well. The beauty of this oil and cold wax is that you can try something on and then change it. It's very easy to change. This painting was painted wet in wet, but you could go a certain length of time of painting, and then once things start slipping around and getting a little too thick or too wet, instead of mixing it all together, and you don't want to get mud, I'm being very delicate with how I apply new colors at this point. I could wait for it to dry and then proceed on top to create more layers. But I really enjoy the challenge of painting wet in wet, and just to see how far can I go with these layers of paint. Scraped back to the original yellow there for a bit just to have variation in that little green gold section. Adding a little bit more pure white at my focal point flower. And sometimes, like here, I'm not adding paint. I'm just changing shapes, and I'm scraping into the paint that's already there and moving it. Pick it up from one spot, move it to another. There, I like that shape a little bit better with the point. There, scraped back to the purple. I had white there and it was just too heavy. So I scraped back to get just a little bit of that purple shining through. And whatever you have in the positive shape, you want it to be into the negative space as well. I play back and forth between the flower shapes and the background shapes. I'm starting to fiddle with just little spots that catch my eye, getting close towards the end of the painting session. I'm doing a lot of little dabbing and wiping on my rag. It's mainly if some areas have too much texture, I might just go in and make the texture a little bit not important, or vary it if it's just too intense in color. So if you mix the neighboring colors, it'll decrease the intensity as well by neutralizing. And I do the combination of the purples with the greens and the teals. That's fun. On my website, I do have courses that talk about how I mix my paint, how I prepare my panels, and a lot of different techniques that I use with the oil and cold wax, doing trees and florals and landscapes, more abstracted landscapes, all sorts of things. It's more in depth. So if you're interested, check out my website, lindabanfalvi.com. The link is in the comments, or in the description rather. And so have a look there. There's a course on oil cold wax. There's pansies in water media using fluid acrylics on watercolor paper. I have a course that I have different techniques that I show and exercises throughout, starting from the drawing to the finished painting. You could paint along if you want. And so it'll show a bit of a contrast from this oil and cold wax painting to working with water media. And it doesn't matter what the media is for me. I try to paint in very similar styles, and things will look a little bit different depending on the media. But basically I use similar colors and techniques of using. I like to work with the scrapers with acrylics as well, and the rollers. So there are similarities. I just make sure that I don't work with, if I'm working with acrylics wet and wet in a water media approach, if I want, I could work with oil and cold wax on top of that if I wanted to, but I would prefer, you have to make sure that's completely dry before you do so. But sometimes it's nice to have the underpainting started in acrylic and then working partially with the oils and cold wax. There's so many possibilities. So check out the course if you're interested in more about how to work with this medium. And I think I'm just about done. I seem to have done a lot of fiddling around with modifying shapes at the end of this one. And I did do a lot of carving in with the tip of this particular tool. I don't know if you can actually see the little fine marks that I'm making. But when you look at the final picture that shows up on the screen, you'll notice all the textures and the little line work within those petals that I made just with the tool itself with no paint, just scraping back. Just adding a little white along the edge there and having part of it disappear off into the background. Flowers are a beautiful excuse to paint with color and texture. I think that's what draws me to them. I'm not a gardener, but I love flowers, and I mainly love to paint them. And here's the finished piece. Have a look at the texture that's in there scraping back. And I hope you enjoyed this painting. Join me for some of my other ones on my YouTube channel as well.